Okay. Good morning, everyone. Today, of the 24 things that I think someone needs to know to understand American history, we're going to talk about the Industrial Revolution. This is, very important for an array of reasons. First, England becomes the central point of the Industrial Revolution. They discover how to make steam and how to apply steam to create mechanical systems. So it's the beginning of mass production. Although I've made a case before that mass production really begins with human machinery in the 9th century in Africa, moving salt from Iraq to the coast of Africa. Anyway, but the machinery comes about with the Industrial Revolution in England. This really transforms, again, the human experience because it opens a pathway for gathering enormous wealth, and with that wealth, its consequent power. And that wealth and that power became so enormous that whatever it took to get that wealth and that power was okay. So you had slavery, you had murder, you had invasions, you had taking over countries, all to get resources that would feed the industrial machine. Our American history is dominated by cotton and the enormous wealth that was generated by cotton. Cotton helped give birth to capitalism in America. And so these things that are really important pillars of the American story are given birth at the time of the Industrial Revolution. And if you want to look at the roots of the world wars, it doesn't have to do with the Archduke Ferdinand. It has to do with the insatiable desire for more resources. They were invading Africa, Asia. They were taking over the world so that they could get the resources, feed the industrial machine, make enormous profits and wealth. So let's begin with a video about how we get to the source of the Industrial Revolution. The beginning of it is coal.
300 million years ago, life flourishes in massive tropical swamps where planet Earth is cooking up a surprise. As plants die here, they are buried, compacted, and cooked. Energy created in the Big Bang and radiated by the sun to plants on Earth is now locked away underground as coal, a gift to be opened by human beings millions of years in the future. $250 million years ago, an apocalypse unfolds. The biggest spike in volcanic activity since the early days of the planet. The atmosphere is choked with carbon dioxide, and the diversity of animal life spawned in the Cambrian explosion is stopped dead in its tracks. More than 70% of all species on Earth go extinct in the worst mass die-off in history, the Permian extinction. Extinction is a recurring character in the story of planet Earth. 5 times in the last 500 million years, some cataclysm wiped out the dominant species. It's a reshuffling of the deck that allows new creatures to take hold. New creatures like the dinosaurs. Dinosaurs will reign for the next 160 million years. During that time, the first hardwood forests appear. And after more than 4 billion years, the moon's gravity finally settles Earth into a 24-hour day. At the start of the dinosaur era, the continents are clustered together into a single landmass we call Pangaea. But now, they start to break apart. Africa separates from South America. The vast Atlantic Ocean opens up, creating what will become one of the defining barriers of human history, the gulf between the old and new worlds. The undisputed stars of the dinosaur era are animals like Triceratops and T-Rex, but there are some important creatures scurrying around their feet.
If we were to trace our lineage back far enough, we would come to really small shrew-like mammals surrounded by these titans of reptile life. During that time, mammals, we were living on the fringes. We were maybe stealing dinosaur eggs, maybe just eking out an existence. So the dinosaurs kind of held us back.
The biggest headline of the history of dinosaurs, which is 160 million years, is that we lost. Mammals lost. We couldn't get much bigger than a small cat. For 160 million years, all the medium-sized, medium-big, big, gigantic, and stupendous animals were dinosaurs. For that whole time. They beat us fair and square.
But the deck is about to be reshuffled. "65 million years ago, a 6-mile-wide object, likely an asteroid, slams into the Earth. A dust cloud blocks out the sun. Temperatures plummet. Every creature on land weighing over 50 pounds goes extinct. The reign of the dinosaurs is over.
The greatest gift that the dinosaurs ever gave us was dying. When they went extinct, it gave the mammals time to rise.
It doesn't take long after the disappearance of the dinosaurs for the first true primates to appear. Like their later versions, including us, these mammals have evolved forward-facing eyes, allowing for accurate depth perception and flexible hands with 5 digits.
They have 5 fingers, just like us, which means we can grasp things. If you think about other animals that don't have digits organized the way ours are, their ability to hold things, to manipulate objects, is much more limited.
50 million years ago, our primate ancestors are evolving on a planet that is warming. It's so hot, there are jungles at the poles. As the continents drift, the Americas and Africa have almost fully taken shape. But in northern Africa, modern-day Egypt is submerged beneath an ancient sea. On the floor of that sea live small shelled creatures called nummulites. Their shells, made of calcium and carbon, pile up on the sea bottom over millions of years, where they form into limestone. Limestone that will be used to build the Great Pyramids.
Also buried there are the dinosaurs, which become the source of fossil fuels, and also the growth of coal comes with it. Let's take another look.
Inevitably, with life comes death. dead plant matter builds up and decays into dense, soggy layers. Over hundreds of millions of years, rocks cover these layers, and heat from the Earth's core and pressure from the overlying rocks transform these layers into seams of coal. Each lump of coal burned today is made of plants that died 300 million years ago.
So it's to just kind of highlight that what we have is from what happened millions of years ago becomes the source of coal and of fossil fuels. And so what we're dealing with will be well, let's see, hopefully you won't hear Lily in the background. The yard people are here and it gets her upset. Anyway, so what's important to understand is that we have this thing that comes from millions of years ago, and it becomes a resource that we start dealing with in the 1750s, and it transforms the human experience. So when we start to look at root causes of wars, root causes of slavery, root causes of lots of contemporary social issues, it's important to understand that some of it is rooted in things that had happened 50 million years ago. And so what happens is in the mid 18th century, people in England discover that there is coal off of their coast. Mind you, that before they discovered coal, the way they created heat was to burn wood, and so which was not a very efficient source of heat. Along comes coal, and this very small piece of rock is an enormous provides an enormous amount of fuel, and it is a very efficient. Yes, it does damage to the environment, but at that time they didn't know that. But what they find is that they have something that is superior to wood in creating heat and fuel. So they start, developing a coal industry. And what they have to do is, because a lot of it is offshore, they have to use pumps to pump out water so they can get to the coal. And that process is how they then discover steam, that they can use the water to create steam that can drive the pump. And all of that becomes very important in developing that whole industry. And they then do the mechanics of the steam that drive the pumps become the mechanics that drive looms, that create finished product out of the raw material of cotton into clothing that they can then go and market across the world. So all of these become very much tied together. And it ignites a new period of empire building. There's the historiography, the area of study in history about empires, is one that has gathered a lot of attention over the past 20 years. What you have is historians are conducting a lot of research, not just to say, here's the British Empire and here's what it controlled, but they're doing a deeper history into what about the peoples who were affected? What about the cultural conflicts? What about the political implications? And so there's a lot that's being written about empires and history. One of the disappointments, though, is that they're not taking it all the way back to where did the genesis of empire begin, and what did that do to us as a species? And my argument is that empire was predicated upon greed, and that if we don't address that as a central issue, then we will not be able to do anything about warfare, world order, anything. It's like if we could just stop Putin now from taking over Ukraine, then everything will be all right. If the UN can find a solution, then the solution to our world conflict problems will be the UN. No, it ain't it. The UN can be a conduit for addressing the issues of greed. One outlet, there needs to be a much broader sense of what we're looking at is greed. The dismantlement of the American government that we're experiencing right now is because people of wealth and power and greed do not want to be constrained by laws. We're dismantling the legal system. I mean, and I'm just talking about Roe v. Wade. It started long before that. Right now, if you have a product that you get, some serious complications, a consequence of using that product, you should be able to take them to court in civil suit. But now when you buy a product, you sign an agreement that says, no, we'll go to arbitration. The American corporations have, by lobbying and getting laws passed, have removed themselves from the civil justice system. So we're dismantling this sense of a nation of laws. We're dismantling democracy. All of this is because those who build empires do not want to be constrained. Very important factor. Let me get to my next video here. And here, share. Right one here, share.
Industrial age turns Britain into a world power.
Let me get it back.
The industrial age turns Britain into a world power. It produces half of the world's coal, 4/5 of the cotton goods. London's banks hold more money than all other financial centers of the world combined. Britain dominates global trade. It becomes an empire. Powerful enough to challenge a nation 40 times its size. A nation that shunned the advances of the industrial age. China. Population 300 million. A third of the people on Earth. An ancient culture. The world's largest economy, yet closed to outsiders for centuries. Those barriers will soon be brought down by a flower.
And so what we have is this, England becomes a determined and formidable force in transforming the world order and in setting a new standard for how nation states will operate. That what will happen is when they want more resources, they will simply invade to get it. They may do it under a pretense other than saying, we're going here to steal your oil. That kind of thing will become termed our vital interest, right? Well, we have vital interest in the Middle East. Yeah, that vital interest is oil to feed your empire, to feed your industrial operations. Industrialization offers many opportunities for human achievements that could make the world a happy, healthy, and prosperous landscape. However, greed charters a very different course. Let me get to that proper video here. Get out of that. Okay, share that screen. This one. Let me get to one.
If you look closely at the pyramids today, forest progress is met. Our history of the world in 2 hours races towards a close. Mankind has hit a wall. Human progress is stalled by the limits of our muscle. To break through, we'll need a new way to power our lives and the entire history of the world. Remember that billions of years ago, iron from exploding stars was gathered up into planet Earth during its formation. Thousands of years ago, man started using this iron for tools and weapons. To keep our forges burning, we began cutting down our forests. Now, 300 years ago in Britain, iron is in high demand, and the trees are running out. The British need a new source of fuel, and thanks to the decayed remains of ancient ferns, they have one. Coal. But coal itself won't power mankind into the modern world. There's one more fateful twist in the story. As the quest for coal takes miners ever deeper into the ground, water begins flooding the tunnels. To pump out the water, a new invention is needed. In 1712, Thomas Newcomen produces a pump powered by burning coal and driven by steam. Newcomen's machine is the first practical steam engine. It is this combination, energy and engine, fuel and machine, that will free man from the limits of his own muscle and change the world. The Industrial Revolution begins. Along with political revolutions in America and later France, this technological revolution forever transforms the landscape of the world.
And before long, the Atlantic world has become the new economic, therefore cultural, therefore political, therefore military leader, and will utterly dominate global geopolitics from that moment to this.
Trains thunder across the countryside. By the 1870s, the internal combustion engine has arrived, and the Germans invent its killer app, the automobile. Oil, the substance which the ancients considered too flammable to be of any use, becomes the most important commodity on the planet, fueling even more innovation. The telegraph and telephone move messages at lightning speed. With electricity, mankind reclaims the night from darkness. The hub of power has shifted. In 1800, Europeans and their descendants controlled 35% of the land on Earth. By 1900, they control 85%. By the 20th century, fossil fuels and the internal combustion engine have amplified everything, including warfare.
That technology meant that military power and military conquest was something that could be international in a way that it had never been before.
In the 20th century, almost 3 times as many people are killed as a result of war as in the previous 2,000 years of human history combined.
And I would suggest that not only does the nation transform warfare, the very reason for having wars is about mechanization and the wealth and power that can be derived from it. Okay, and so you know, we have a spin that is that the founders of America had planned long ago to end slavery, but they had to continue it for a period of time. And what it fails to recognize, though, is that when you take someone like Thomas Jefferson, his idea was that Virginia had an excess of slaves. And when the tobacco market didn't do very well, they depleted the soils and that sort of thing, and that they didn't need as many slaves, they had an abundance, and he wanted to be able to sell slaves, and he didn't want to compete with those coming from Africa. So they have a plan. We're going to pass a constitution, but we're going to end slavery in 20 years, allegedly. Anyway, that was really not to end slavery. It was to end the international trade of slaves. And because there were many that were concentrated in America. And it, you know, this, of course, had implications for, so what was going to happen is that we're going to harvest slaves. That was their idea, that they would take over more of the landscape of North America, which is covered with rich, fertile soil, not the entire continent, but a lot of it, certainly the Mississippi River Delta. And so they would start selling slaves out of Virginia and become the source of slaves for the rest of the nation as slavery spread. And so it's just important to understand how those things are kind of linked together. And it has, you know, a part of the abortion debate, you know, understand what, you know, they did, and Jefferson calculated it, was that a female represented not only the value that they had in that female for, you know, work at that time, but also that she could produce children. And there was a value placed on how many, on her ability to reproduce and become a part of the harvest. So it's important to recognize that. And then when, you know, Jefferson is in office and they purchase they have the Louisiana Purchase, that opens up all of the Mississippi Delta, and that is rich, fertile soil, coinciding with England now wanting a lot of raw materials, particularly cotton, and they find cotton grows well in the Mississippi Delta. Yes, cotton depletes the soil, but the Mississippi soil is like 40 feet of topsoil. So this becomes a machine for making enormous amounts of money. We like to talk about exceptionalism, but indeed, it really is simply getting a commodity and getting it to the people who have it in demand and making a lot of wealth and power in the process. And so let's take another look at what happens out of this. Not that one. Here we are. Share that.
After 2 centuries of military conquest, the demand for slaves evolved. In the 9th century, the Abbasid dynasty embarked on a monumental project to transform the swamps around Basra into lush orchards. Instead of soldiers, Baghdad now needed workers to cultivate the Iraqi soil. To do so, the empire brought in thousands of slaves.
On some sites, there were between 500 and 5,000 workers, and there was considerable turnover, because in such conditions, their working life barely went beyond 10 to 15 years.
It required a lot of hard labor to remove the salt in order to get to the soil, as well as then to irrigate. For this one, they needed large-scale labor, and they began to import slaves from all over.
Where do the Muslim Arabs go to get slaves? Out of principle, they pick non-Muslim slaves, so from another culture, and outside the empire. Color wasn't the basis for slavery. Culture was. Slaves weren't part of the dominant culture.
In the 9th century, the Arabs extended their trade networks from the entire Mediterranean to the Caucasus, Turkey, the Balkans, and Russia. From the Horn of Africa, entire boatloads of Ethiopian and Nubian captives were sailed up the Nile. Even further out, from the high plateaus of Somalia and Tanzania, successive waves of slaves, referred to as Zanj, streamed into Mesopotamia via the Indian Ocean.
Zanj appears to be a Persian word, zang, and it meant black. And when slaves began to be brought in large numbers to what is now Iraq, there were proportionately so many who were from this part of the coast that Zanj began to be used as a name to mean slaves in general.
Little by little, the number of slaves grew and became so high that rebellions broke out among the banks of the Euphrates and the Tigris. In 1869, the Zanj took up arms and raised an army numbering tens of thousands of men. Heading the insurrection was Ali Muhammad, a former high dignitary of the Abbasid Caliphate.
Okay, so what I wanted to highlight there is that, hope that noise in the background isn't too distracting. What I want to highlight is that the machinery in the 9th century were slaves, and it was used to create great wealth, great power. When we discover coal and steam, it takes that business operation that was performed by humans and it puts it on a much higher scale. Now, mind you, what was going on in the 9th century is that there were the emperors in Africa who were getting very wealthy, very rich by enslaving, by fighting wars, capturing slaves, selling people into slavery. And so this model of greed is not unique to England or to the Industrial Revolution. It is a model that began long before and is simply adopted in a new location, in a new time frame. Let me share that screen. And it also, this phenomenon is what gave birth to capitalism.
Banks give you loans, banks send you checkbooks you never use, banks even text you when your account is overdrawn. Banks are so important that when they get into a mess, the government bails them out, unlike the rest of us. But did you know that the banks that exist today, maybe even the bank that you use, were built off the back of slavery? Empires of dirt, a show about Europeans getting rich at the expense of everyone else. From 1619, 11 million African men, women, and children were stolen from their homes and put to work on the sugar, tobacco, and cotton plantations of America and the Caribbean. Their forced labor helped build Britain into a global superpower. And even after slave owning was abolished in Britain, the British taxpayers still paid £20 million. That's 40% of the national budget, or 16.5 billion in today's money, as compensation for slavery. No, not to the slaves. The money went to the owners. Not a single penny was given to those who had been enslaved. The amount borrowed was so huge that the debt wasn't paid off until 2015, which means that if you paid tax at any point before that, your money went towards compensating slave owners. All four of the UK's largest high street banks have been linked to the slave trade by way of these compensation payments for their loss of human property. Barclays Bank was founded out of a merger with a colonial bank that helped fund the British Empire, and several senior Barclays bankers were involved in the slave trade. Through HSBC's merger with Midland Bank, one of its first managers, George Pollard, received £230,000 of today's money from British taxpayers as compensation. In exchange, he gave up 134 enslaved people on the Caribbean island of Nevis in the 1830s. The president of Lloyds Bank, John White Cater, also received compensation for estates in Jamaica in 1835. And 27 former members of the Bank of England were linked to slavery in the 18th and 19th centuries, including 11 former governors. Even after Britain abolished the slave trade in 1807, we continued to profit off it. Bankers just pivoted to indirect means of making money from the exploitation and trafficking of human beings. The City of London provided the finance for slave traders all around the world, and loans were one way of making money. So a British bank would loan money to a US plantation owner to buy more slaves or agricultural equipment. If you think mortgages are secured against the land you own, think again. So-called plantation mortgages, where US slave owners would borrow money from British banks, were secured against the value of the slaves they owned, not their land. The Royal Bank of Scotland offered plantation mortgages. So did Barclays. These mortgages were then bundled into bonds and sold to investors all over the world. When the US slave owners made repayments, the people who owned those bonds made a small profit. The City of London has defined British wealth for hundreds of years. Money comes in and money goes out to countries all over the world. And our status as a global power rests on our financial institutions. But the labor that built many of these institutions was enslaved. Iconic buildings like the Guildhall in the heart of the City of London epitomise Britain's involvement with the slave trade. Between 1660 and 1690, 15 Lord Mayors of London were shareholders in the Royal Africa Company, which shipped more African slaves to the Americas than any other institution in the history of slavery. A statue of William Beckford Sr., twice Lord Mayor of London, still stands in the Guildhall to this day. Beckford grew rich off the toil of slaves he owned on 20,000 acres of land in Jamaica. The Royal Exchange was the heart of the City of London, where stocks were bought and traded from all over the world. It was funded by Sir William Garrard, who helped to develop the Moroccan slave trade in the 1500s. So the blood and toil of African slaves literally helped build the bricks of the City of London. Following the Black Lives Matter protests, the insurance company Lloyds of London agreed to pay reparations to black community groups for its involvement in the slave trade. Campaigners are calling on the banks to follow suit. So when you go to withdraw cash from an ATM, remember that it was your bank that was complicit all those years ago. Slavery built the financial institutions we use today.
Okay, so this the phenomenon of industrialization took what had already been a business enterprise landscape that was based on human labor and exploitation of resources and invasions and occupations of land, and it escalated it to a much higher level, creating enormous wealth and power. So when you go on vacation and you go to Rome or you go to England and you visit castles in Spain and look at these monuments of architecture, understand it was built with slaves, the profits from exploiting slaves, the profits from invasions, occupations, warfare, and all that goes with it. When we talk about, honoring the Queen, who recently passed, she may be a very nice person. It's just important to understand one becomes a queen when one is born into an empire. An empire is a cauldron of human suffering. Okay, with that, Lauren, we can open up and have questions and stuff.
There we go. So if people have questions, you can use the raise the hand function. Oh, we have some of our Suga members in London with us right today. Speaking of empires, Bill saw the king, King Charles. So, Margita, what do you have?
Hey, my question is, Sal, what are the, primary historic documents that would prove that Thomas Jefferson indeed was advocating to eliminate foreign competition in slave trading? I'd never heard that before. Where can we find that?
Well, if you go to my paper, I think I have references in the paper about Jefferson doing that. But also in my bibliography, there's a couple of books there that really go into it in detail. Master of the Mountain is in the bibliography, and I believe it's Winzik is the historian who wrote about it. But yeah, it's referenced in many locations.
Okay, and it's in none of our history books. It's in the schools.
None of the textbooks that will have.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
That's for sure. No.
Oh.
You know what it is you have to go and, get books from the academics, and mind you, who buys academic historians' books? If a professor can sell 50,000 books to students, it's a success. But most people just, they don't read that stuff. But there's a lot out there in the history world that really goes. Historians really over the past, I would say, beginning in the 1960s on out, the PhD historians have really ripped the lid off the Walt Disney version of American history and have produced some really dynamic works that are shocking. Hey, Tim.
Hey, thanks for talking about the banks and how wealth is founded on the backs of slaves and things. It reminded me of Georgetown University in Washington, D.C., and how it came about. Somebody had done some research and had discovered Georgetown initially didn't break this news, but somebody else doing research did, that they had owned slaves, and that the selling of the slaves the money was used to found Georgetown University. Now, this is, I think is it a Jesuit?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And so then Georgetown University had to fess up and do its own research and admit that, yes, indeed, this is this terrible thing that had happened to what is now a renowned university. Again, on the backs of slaves. So I think I may be misunderstanding this, but I thought that Georgetown said that they would grant scholarships or something to African-American students, or some form of a compensation about this, to admit it and to document this as part of their history. Perhaps you can clarify that a little bit for me.
Yeah, no, that is the story, but it's also the story of Brown University, Harvard, and Columbia University. All of them, all of the Ivy League, the initial funding sources of money that they got came out of the slave trade. Brown was provided insurance and not Brown University, but the name Brown, who it's named after, was involved in the shipping and financing of the slave trade in America. So, I mean, many of these institutions, they've had to own up, and for many, they didn't know. I mean, they did in the beginning, but years later, they didn't know what the involvement was of slavery. University of Virginia also is another one. I mean, it's this is and they're trying to come up with ways to make some sort of reconciliation, but you also have a blowback to that, where people are filing suits saying, we shouldn't have to do that. So it's
right, and others of a certain political persuasion are saying that we shouldn't talk about the history of the United States because it makes the weak-minded feel bad.
Right.
Okay.
No, I know. Look, Margita, you had the question about Thomas Jefferson. They showed in there that England ends the slave trade, and but it's years later that it outlaws slavery in England. And so what do they then do? They're going to pay reparations, not to the people who were enslaved,
no,
but to the slave owners.
That's incredible. That's just,
and they didn't
historic travesty. It's just unbelievable.
They didn't finish, and this is in the 1800s. They haven't just finished paying off their reparations in
2015. My God. To whom did they pay? Who was left?
A nickel out of it.
Who was left to receive that money in 2015?
They're in Parliament. A lot of people in Parliament today were
Oh, they only reimbursed the English who owned slaves. They didn't reimburse the Americans.
No, but understand that Abraham Lincoln liked the idea that England had started, and he proposed paying reparations to the slave owners.
Oh my goodness. Well, I guess that didn't go very far.
No, the slave owners said, no, to hell with you. We don't want to get compensated. We want our slaves.
Oh, geez. Well, they turned down a good deal then. Oh, my goodness.
But they were making a fortune out of cotton. So, it really, I mean, that whole thing that us humans got to this level of immorality is tragic, but of even greater tragedy to me is that we honor and pay homage to the people who were that immoral. And then we're surprised when we have the kind of insanity that we had on January 6th. We shouldn't be surprised.
Yeah.
Because we can't get honest. It's like, DeSantis and the others. Brian Kemp, Brian Kemp pushes to get a law that says parents have a right to know what their kids are being taught in school. Apparently, he never heard of parent-teacher night.
Right.
But he passed a law about how but what he's really disguising there is, I'm passing a law to prevent our school system from teaching your children as to the abuses, the inhuman, immoral abuses inflicted upon Black people in America.
Yeah. Well, parents have always been able to go to schools and meet with teachers or anybody they want to meet.
Absolutely. If parent-teacher night, they have nights.
Right. And the thing is, a lot of parents didn't show up.
Yeah, but it is. I mean, when I heard him say that, I thought of all the parent-teacher nights I went to.
Yeah.
Suffered through.
Yes. Yeah. All right, thank you.
And I'm wondering, what the hell is he talking about? Obviously, he's never gone to one. Anyway. Thanks, Tim. Go ahead. Hey, Ralph.
Enjoyed that class as usual in kind of a depressing way. But that last part about the Bank of England and the money being made, empires built off of the involvement with slaves by all the people involved with that bank. I guess I've been thinking about reparations lately, and it does seem to me that you could repeat that story with almost every institution and government across the globe, since we know now that the capture and exploitation of slaves goes, I mean, what they were talking about Baghdad, back around times before Christ. I mean, I guess what I'm struck by is the enormity of it, the fact that I think we long ago passed the point in world history where a problem like that could even the surface of it be scratched. And I will confess I have grave questions about the idea of reparations in these United States. I have grave questions about it. I think so much thought needs to go into that before the nation commits to something like that. There is so much wrong in our country, and hearing that and seeing that, just, how many governments do we want to point at that have a lot to answer for? I mean, so many from the Second World War, but we can go way back, right? We can go to colonialism, and we can go back like they did to the Romans and the Greeks and the Egyptians and, the probably whoever that was, the Hittites or whoever in Iraq. I mean, it's a fact of history that I don't know that in the modern era, the world can set off down the path of fixing this. Is reparations the way to fix it? Is reparations fair? Is the historical knowledge there to fairly compensate those who either should be compensated now or should have been a long time ago? I doubt it. I mean, it just, maybe that's a bad attitude on my part, but I simply bow down to that and say, this should be talked about, this should be taught in class, but this cannot be repaired.
No, I totally understand. And there are many historians who, have made a case as to why, if you were going to try and do reparations, it wouldn't work, because you've got so many people implicated and complicit in it, so many institutions. But let me suggest this. First, the First Empire occurred, what is it now? It'd be 4,300 years ago. 4,300 is the First Empire. Now, there's other things that happened before that, but that's a long span of time. But what did that happen 4,300 years ago was I'm going to use the military that I've put around me to protect my stuff. I'm going to use it to invade others who have stuff and I want it. Okay, so that's what happens. But what if we got, and again, this is, I don't want to presume like I have the answer to the question. I just want to make a suggestion. My thought is we can get people, maybe we can't make reparations, but perhaps we can rectify the severe discrepancies between then and now. What I mean is, I can show areas in Atlanta where there is desperate poverty. There's no excuse for that. We can do stuff about that. We have, certainly a change is going to take generations for change to happen. But if we were on a basis where everyone was going to be treated equally, they were going to get a good education, there were going to be jobs available, opportunities available for people, a guaranteed income, which Richard Nixon suggested, so that we made sure people didn't fall below a level of what is a human existence. I'm not talking about vacations in Hawaii. I'm talking about a place that's not rat infested with food that isn't, making, people obese in their first 12 years. So I'm just saying there is an answer to that. And it doesn't mean that no one can have wealth and no one can enjoy luxury. They can. We can have a society like that.
Right.
And really, and mind you, all these things about crime and all the rest, it all gets addressed in that process because it's all tied together. And I know that's a bleeding heart liberal kind of response. It is important to understand, the combination of combat Marine and bleeding heart liberal, all in one package right here for your class. But it's not about giving things away. It's about, if we don't have a healthy society, as rich as you are, don't think you're going to be insulated from it.
Right. Yeah, we used to say back in the 60s, and I remember this because my sister was older than me and she was a bleeding heart liberal, and I'm very much followed in her path. Liberals believe a better world is possible. I mean, they used to say that. It was a watchword in the 60s, and she never outgrew it. But teaching the students how it really was has to be a component, which is exactly why you're right about this. What they really want is control. We just don't want our kids told any of that unpleasant crap. That was back then, doesn't matter now. We don't want it taught. So we're not going to have anything even approaching critical race theory taught in the schools because we just don't want the controversy. We think everything is fine. Herschel Walker said on TV, I believe everybody's a nice guy in Georgia. That's what he said. It's great people. Everything is great. So that's what they want. And I have heard conversations in private that I just overheard and stayed out of. And that is exactly what was expressed to me. Damn these people talking about it. We don't have those kind of problems. And we don't want it talked about. It sounded very much like what my father heard in the 60s about we just need those damn Yankees to go back up there and leave us alone because our Negroes don't have any problems with how things are.
Right.
Very much the same thing.
Sure. But we also have an example though of consequences. The dinos ran this place for 167 million years, and they drove everybody down under. We had to hide underground. Then along came the comeuppance. We're going to have it. It's going to happen. Go ahead, Maxine. Hi.
Hey, I wanted to talk to Ralph, to say to Ralph, as a therapist and somebody who is involved with human dynamics, it seems to me that part of greed is in us. It's in our DNA. That's not going to go away. The question would be, how can we work with that? And Sal as well. I mean, you can see, all of us can see what we could do legally to change the system so that it's more balanced. But the question is how?
Well, but Maxine, the argument I would make is that our species existed for 350,000 years without greed. We didn't get it until we discovered agriculture.
True. Well, I think it is. Look at the population growth.
I understand, and I think it is a part of our DNA now, but it is possible to look back at a time when humans cooperated with each other and took care of each other. It's not so, impossible. We did it for 350,000 years.
Sal, how many people were on the planet 350 million years ago?
No, I understand.
There's just too many people. There are not enough jobs. We've already outgrown the planet's what it can do.
No, I don't disagree with that.
Maybe
I don't know how we come to an answer for addressing greed, establishing boundaries that would somehow moderate that while also taking care of, people who have been, through slavery and other things, forced into the position they're in. The greatest thing for generational wealth is owning land. We prohibited Black people from owning land for.
There's no question. I understand all that.
So it's again.
What I don't see though is if the population continues to grow, which it's going to grow. So now people say, well, we have to have more children to pay for the older people and Social Security. Well, great. More people, more energy, more. It's not going to work this way.
Sure.
And it isn't, I understand what you're saying, but I think it's all the old science. You put enough people around a table, if there are only 4 or 5 and the table's filled with food, fine. Put 25 and there's not enough food, then you start seeing what we genetically have within us. So I don't.
No, I understand. Yeah. I think for me, I see the table that has food for 25 people that has one person sitting there, and the table for 25 people have no food.
And there's a tablecloth and there's silver and yeah.
Almost like hummingbirds at the feeder, huge feeder full, and yet they're all fighting over it.
Oh, you look at any bird feeder, the bigger birds are going to chase away the little birds. I mean, it's just part of life.
No,
eat each other.
Yeah.
Margita, do you have a last quick comment here?
Yes, I wonder how much truth-telling, historically speaking, is going on in Great Britain at this point. Have they revised, or are they revising their educational history books and the teaching in schools? Because as was mentioned before, upon the death of the Queen, you saw so much sentimental reaction towards the empire, totally unthinking, as if the vast majority of this country had been totally brainwashed into this model and idea of empire. And when I watch some of these masterpiece theater series, which I love, by the way, to really look at them, there is a lot of just not very thoughtful buying into the glory of empire, and there is no critical angle that I can see. And I watched the Victoria series too, before. So I think that it seems to me from an outside perspective that Great Britain has a lot of dirt on their hands, historically speaking. And I wonder how much the educational part of society is working on being truthful about that, to educate their populace, like we need to do here.
Yeah, no, I'll send out a podcast of English historians talking about how they are writing about empires and about the British Empire. So they're going through the same thing that America is, but again, that's at a university level versus what would be a textbook level. But I'll send that out to you. I think you'll find it interesting. Maxine,
So,
go ahead.
1 second, so really quick.
I happened to land in London a few hours before the Queen died. So I watched this calm and descent over the.
Did you have anything to do with it? Did you have anything to do with
I
it?
slipped out fast so that they wouldn't. I quickly went to France, but no, I couldn't even get near Buckingham Palace. But and I asked everybody I would speak to how they felt about it. The cab drivers, the people I met in stores and such. To a person, they didn't think of the empire. They had lost a grandmother. They call her, I think, Nana or Nanny, Nana. It really, so I'm only bringing another aspect in. Sure, they don't know what it all means, or they don't care, but at that point, they have lost a symbol of stability and caring, and there were people who called themselves Republicans. Their Republicans are the ones who are opposite monarchists. And even they respected her for her commitment. So I just wanted you to know that there's another angle to how they're experiencing it now.
Sure.
It'll be interesting to see what Charles does.
Yeah.
King Charles, excuse me.
Okay, well, we have another class coming up in a few minutes. So
you want to give us a quick update about next week?
No, we'll see what happens next week.
Okay, everyone. Thank you for coming.
Okay, everybody.
Thanks, Al.
We'll see you next week.
Okay.
Be safe.
Yeah.